New this year. I mentioned yesterday this is our 9th year, and about 10 years ago, a bunch of us from the National Park Service, Wink Hastings, if Wink has been here for a couple days, and a couple other folks within the Alliance, put together what we called, the National Park Service was doing them across the watershed, and we helped them coordinate a Mason-Dixon watershed dialogue. And we invited watershed groups and local government folks from right along the border of Maryland and Pennsylvania, mostly towards the mid-eastern Pennsylvania. So Lancaster and York County, Harford and Baltimore County, that area right in there. And about 25 of us got in the room, and the outcome of that day, lots of great things came out, but one of the things the folks said is, we could really use an annual get-together. And the thing that I left from that day, and I still remember it, was that it needed to be a celebration. We wanted a chance to come together, celebrate the work we're doing, get energized for the year ahead, the work ahead, learn new things, share with each other. And so all through the years, we've kept pretty much 5 core principles for this thing. Even through the first couple years, we had to submit grants like everybody else, and I had to try and figure out how many pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus we were removing this weekend. I still haven't quite got that one, but I did get towards something about bathroom stuff at some point in there. All kinds of crazy stuff like that. We've always tried to maintain that one key piece of making this a celebration, a thank you for what you're doing, for all the good work. And so this year, I wanted to try something a little new, as I said, and let's honor some of the work we're doing and some of the people that are doing it out there. And so I wanted to take just a little bit of time this morning and do so. Now, I have to admit, I'm plagiarizing a little bit of stuff from our Taste of the Chesapeake. It's the Alliance's annual fundraiser, and we hold it annually, and for whatever daggone reason, it happens to be always the week before the forum. So we're a little crazy around the office. But this year we had several champions. We had an overall champion. It actually was the farmer that you saw in the video the very first day, Luke Brubaker. The guy who was holding the cow crap in his hand and rolling it around a little bit. He actually won our overall award this year as the conservationist, or I forget what we call it, environmental hero of the year. But we honored a couple of other folks that I wanted to highlight here this morning. One of them is here, one of them couldn't be with us. But it does need to be noted that John Tippett, the former director of the Friends of the Rappahannock, retired from that position. I actually talked to him a little bit at the taste and caught up some, and he actually has taken a job back as a consultant back with the Friends of the Rappahannock, and is doing well. I don't know if you guys know, but he had been battling Lyme's disease for a while. He's doing well. He still has his good days and bad days, but he's looking forward to the future, and he's excited to have some time to spend at home. But just a little bit of John's background. He had been there at the Friends of Rappahannock for 20 years. Under his leadership, I don't know, you probably saw the videos, but he was instrumental in getting the Embry Dam removed, allowing fish passage for, somebody probably knows the number, but it's hundreds of, and maybe even close to 1,000 miles of river and stream. It was the biggest dam on the Rappahannock River, and he forged its way through and got it removed. He was the first, he spearheaded, I think it was the first code and ordinance change in Virginia to allow for green infrastructure. He was instrumental in getting that through down in Friends of Rappahannock are based in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And if you haven't seen it before, they've got a string of land. They preserve 4,200 acres of land all along the Rappahannock River. I think it's called the Pearls or something. Rebecca, like the pearls of something, but these little pops of land all along that form a network of parks and access points along the river that is just fantastic down there. Really spearheaded a lot of the land preservation stuff. So we wanted to recognize John here. I know he's got some of his coworkers here, and he couldn't be with us this year. Oh, there they are up top. You guys know all the numbers. So thank you, John. Tell John we appreciate his work. The next person we honored there was actually one of the folks who helped us plan the very first Chesapeake Watershed Forum. Charlie Conklin has been involved in this work for a long time. He's volunteered 20 years or so now, Charlie. About that, he's one of those, you think about success stories, and here's a guy who built his career at Bethlehem Steel in Baltimore, and you probably heard the stories about Bethlehem Steel. And somewhere along the way, he got his come to Jesus moment or whatever it was. Not saying he wasn't a great environmentalist before, but he retired from there, and soon thereafter started becoming the more or less the Johnny Oak Tree of Baltimore County. Charlie is recognized for his leadership of the Gunpowder Valley Conservancy. Like I said, he's been there over 20 years. Gunpowder Valley Conservancy is both a restoration organization and a land preservation organization, and that's I've worked with Charlie a lot over the years, and it's sometimes been a challenge trying to run both. It's almost like two different organizations kind of moving down, and they've done a great job with it and struggled and worked through some of the struggles. He was a board member and chair of the Alliance for some of my early years at the Alliance, and I greatly appreciated his leadership of the organization and my ability to be able to call him up at any time and get some advice from him. We worked together on a lot of tree planting projects in those days. We still try to help out the GVC, but they've grown so much now that they don't really need us so much anymore, which is a good thing. He's also served on the Baltimore County Soil Conservation District. He was one of the original partners or original conveners of the Interfaith Partners of Chesapeake. He's a member of the Towson Presbyterian Church, where he's working to get environmental stuff going on there. He's a member of the Baltimore County Forestry Board. And all around, this is the kind of person we want all of our people to be out there, all of the people that are in our neighborhoods. Charlie, thank you so much. The next thing I wanted to do, I wanted to just point to, in your program on the second page, the Forum Planning Committee members. You'll see a list of there, some great leaders in our work here. A lot of good folks, a lot of good minds, and it takes a lot of good people to put this thing on. We generally start somewhere in about November, and we review the evaluations from the year, and we decide at what direction we want to go, and then somewhere along January or so, we start coming together as a group and saying, okay, how are we going to move this through? And we break into teams, and you've met your track planners out there if you're a presenter, and they do a lot of work, and a lot of times it's thankless work. So I wanted to take a minute and thank these people. They're all listed there. I'm not going to read all of their names, but I wanted to make sure that we definitely recognize all of them for helping us. Thank you all. It's greatly appreciated. I sometimes feel like we give them a calendar, the Alliance calendar every year, and I know that doesn't say much, but it's what we can do, and we appreciate your help from all of you. Next thing, our new Chesapeake Conservation Corps volunteer. If you're in Maryland and you haven't worked with the Chesapeake Conservation Corps volunteer, I would greatly recommend it. The Chesapeake Bay Trust, one of our partners here, has this program, and I think there's 26 young folks. You'll see them, they're all here. They're the ones running around out there. They're putting the posters up over in the commons area. They spend a year with groups like ours and yours and whoever else and learn this business, make some connections, do some work, and regretfully, the person that comes in as our Chesapeake Conservation Corps person doesn't have a whole lot of time to, put their toe in the water because we're coordinating the forum right when they start. And so Peyton Brown, I wanted to thank as our Chesapeake Conservation Corps volunteer this year. I dumped a lot of stuff on here for this. The PowerPoint presentation I'm gonna present this morning was put together by her as I was doing some other stuff, and I do appreciate it, so thank you. But if you get a chance, well, don't if you get a chance, take a chance and talk to some of the folks that are running around. How many CCC folks are in the room here this morning? Got some CCC. Some of them didn't make it up quite so early this morning. I'm just going to throw that out to you. I did hear that there was some fun out by the fire last night. But anyway, I wanted to just, we sent a call around earlier, a month and a half or so ago, to tell us what you're doing and let us know some of your successes. And some folks responded back, and I wanted to highlight some of those. First and foremost, Rainscape Retrofits from the Friends of the Rappahannock. There they are up there. Several years ago, they developed a Rainscape Retrofits program, and they implement low-maintenance residential best management practices and encourage infiltration. Over this past year, we're really talking about this from last year to now. Over 25 site assessments, completed 20 Rainscape retrofit installations. They included rain gardens, bioretention, bioswales, rain barrel systems, soil aeration, grass swales, and turf to natives conversion. So wanted to give them a big hand on all the work you guys are doing. Thank you very much. Next is the DCR Natural Heritage Program's Virginia Wetlands Catalog. It sounds like they've been working on this one for a while, but Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation Natural Heritage Program completed their statewide Virginia Wetlands Catalog. Catalog maps wetlands identified by the National Wetlands Inventory and predicts wetland areas identified by DCR for their heritage models. Wetlands were ranked based on conservation value and restoration potential. Two-year project was primarily funded by NRCS, and match funding was provided by DCR, the Nature Conservancy, and the Virginia Department of Transportation. So thank you all for that great work. Much appreciated. Midshore Riverkeeper Conservancy, Agricultural Innovation. You may have caught this talk yesterday. Our friend Drew Koslow has been, as you see, out in the mud a little bit, but some great innovative technology. They designed and constructed 2 this year, innovative wood chip bioreactors and groundwater interceptors with farmers. In November 2013, they installed the first one. The next one's later. Constructed on 2 local farms, the project have engendered widespread interest from local and state leaders in the agricultural community. These practices take very little land out of production, are inexpensive, require no maintenance, can last 20 to 30 years, and can reduce nitrogen in groundwater by up to 40%. Presently, MRC has multiple agricultural landowners signed up for this project, for this technique, for next year, and they received grant funding to cover the cost of computer-aided designs to launch the effort. Great work out there. I love. Any of the Midshore Riverkeeper folks here? There's a couple. One. Thank you. Indian River Park Nature Trail and Invasive Control. The Friends of the Indian River, down in the city of Chesapeake, and along with the city of Chesapeake Parks, Recreation, Tourism, and several other partners, established over 7 miles of nature trail and begun invasive controls in the past 18 months. Their hope is to transform the park into a destination conservation area They had over 500 hours of volunteer work put into the park, organizing several invasive species removal days and native plant replantings, and they have a Clean the Bay Day site in progress now. The park is enjoyed now by volunteers, visitors, bird watchers, and is gaining momentum. Moving forward, the Friends of the Indian River have plans to install an educational native species garden and include the park in the Elizabeth River Trail. So thank you very much, Friends of Indian River. Anybody here? No hands this morning. What's that? Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. So there's the great pictures of Indian River. Conserve Spout Run, or Sea Spout Run, stream bank restoration project. It's a citizen effort to remove Spout Run from Virginia's impaired waters list. Not only did Sea Spout Run plan and implement this stream bank restoration project, they saw it tested. Only days after finishing the restoration project this summer, torrential downpour increased the stream flow by 36-fold. The creation of this stabilized system and more natural flood bank prevented its estimated 130 cubic yards of sediment from being deposited in the waterway downstream. The partners of Sea Spout Run include Trout Unlimited, the Downstream Project, Piedmont Environmental Council, and others hope to see how Spout Run fares over time. So thank you very much. Anybody here? Thank you all. Elks Run Watershed Group. I love these stories, new groups that are forming out there. That's one of the things about the forum that I like, is meeting the new folks that are coming into this work every year. In partnership with the West Virginia Conservation Association, Downstream Project, and the Kakapan Institute, the Elks Run Watershed Group has gotten up and running well in the past year. It's a tributary of the Potomac River, located in West Virginia, and around 1,500 people get their drinking water from this surface water stream. The group has conducted several projects this year that lead to water pollution reduction and connecting citizens to the watershed. During one of their successful tree plantings, the group created a video guide to tree planting that can be viewed from anyone on their website. Thank you all very much. And our friends at Gunpowder Valley Conservancy. This is their Clear Creeks, Our Water, Our Heritage, Our Pride program. Located in the Gunpowder Watershed of Maryland, just north of Baltimore, has focused much energy this year on its Clear Creeks program. It's a 2-year grant-funded, citizen-based response to a community desire for improved water quality and clarity in the creeks and rivers of the Middle River and tidal gunpowder watersheds. It also serves many of the goals established in the Baltimore County Small Watershed Action Plan, Don Alton, set for these two watersheds. The Clear Creeks project has accomplished 1,305 trees planted and 6,000 pounds of invasive plants removed and over 10 tons of trash removed from streams and more. Thank you, Gunpowder Valley Conservancy. Great project. The Mountain Institute. They've been coming to the forum for quite a few years now. The Mountain Institute piloted a new classroom-based program this past winter called Mountain Energy Monitors. Mountain Energy Monitors provides hands-on learning opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and math. I guess those are the STEM fields. Am I right? All right, good. And encourages students and teachers to save energy at their schools and homes. TMI's education coordinator, Kelly Waddle, noted the tangible goal of reducing school energy consumption makes the program relevant and exciting for teachers and students. Many West Virginia schools commonly spend more on energy bills than textbooks and computers combined. As some West Virginia schools struggle to keep the lights on, the Mountain Energy Monitors offers energy curriculum which empowers students and teachers while providing students with scientific skills. So let's give all of them a great round of thanks. And thanks to you all, for those of us who didn't have time because they were busy doing work, to send in some stuff. Help us make this better and grow as this year comes and we get here next year. I'd like to officially turn the mic over to Jill Witkowski with the Choose Clean Water Coalition. She's going to introduce our guest speaker this morning.
Thanks, Lou. Good morning. I'm Jill Witkowski. I'm the director of the Choose Clean Water Coalition. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a 200-member group organization of national, regional, and local groups from across the watershed. We would love to have you join us if you're not already a member. So if you want more information, check us out online or come see me. Over the past year, I've also had the honor of being a member of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where I've had the pleasure of getting to know this morning's speaker, Matthew Tejada. Matthew is the director of EPA's Office of Environmental Justice, and he's been there since March 2013. EPA actually snatched him up from Texas, where he spent 5 years leading the Air Alliance of Houston. In Texas, he energized the grassroots to work together to reduce air pollution, particularly where they had disproportionate impacts on low-income and minority communities. But not only did he engage the grassroots, he really worked on building collaborations with industry and with local governments to really make a change in Houston. Matthew, since he's begun his work at OEJ, has worked on implementing the vision of the executive order on environmental justice that President Clinton signed 20 years ago this February through working on Plan EJ 2014, which he'll talk about today. I'm really excited to hear Matthew talk about where we've come in the past 20 years and where we're going on environmental justice issues. I think this will be a great overview for all of us as our community looks forward to taking a deeper dive into these issues with our third annual symposium on environmental justice and health disparities impacts in Maryland and Virginia. That'll be held on December 6th and 7th at University of Maryland College Park. It is free. The focus this year is on Chesapeake Bay watershed and what we can do, how we can bring communities together to fight this fight together. And if you're so inspired by what Matthew has to say today that you can't wait till December to learn more about environmental justice and what you can do, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council is actually meeting next week on Wednesday and Thursday in Alexandria, Virginia, and the focus of that meeting will be mostly on climate change and adaptation, as well as the carbon rule. But with that, I will turn it over to Matthew. Thank you very much.
Make sure this comes on. Morning. I should have known with a conservation group I didn't need to wear a suit. But I didn't bring anything else to wear. Thank you all so much for having me out this morning. Thank you, Jill, for the introduction. Again, my name is Matthew Tejada. I'm the director of the Office of Environmental Justice for EPA and have been for about a year and a half now. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff we have going on at EPA, where we've been coming from over the past few years, and where we see ourselves going in the EPA, but hopefully across the federal government and across state and local governments and working with communities over the next several years. And like Jill said, this is an important year for us for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is the 20th anniversary of President Clinton's signing of Executive Order 12898 on it, environmental justice. And as executive orders go, it was actually really a pretty good one because it filled a gap in the federal government where we didn't have any real authority to do environmental justice. The previous year, there had been an attempt in Congress to pass an act on environmental justice, much as there is one for clean air or clean water or hazardous waste. That attempt failed, and so the hole was filled by the issuing of this executive order. And that's a good thing in some respects. It's a limiting thing in others, because that directs the entire federal government to do environmental justice. It doesn't direct anybody else to do environmental justice, as an act would. We can't go out then and say, no, when you're doing the Clean Air Act, environmental justice. So there is still some work to be done in where we need to go with environmental justice outside of our agency. Part of the progression of doing environmental justice is exactly what Jill had mentioned just a minute ago, Plan EJ 2014, if folks have heard that. It's actually the agency's strategic roadmap for doing environmental justice. And what does that mean? Well, we got to the agency and we figured out everybody loves environmental justice. They think they understand environmental justice. They want to do environmental justice. But what does that mean for the guy that's sitting there writing a permit for some plant out in western Missouri? What does that mean for somebody in the water department working on fish consumption rates up in the Pacific Northwest? What does that mean for somebody just down the road in Washington, D.C. writing the new MACT for refineries for the United States? What does that mean? And we didn't really have any answers. We had kind of loosey-goosey answers. So Plan EJ 2014 was really our attempt to look at the business of the agency and start to answer those questions. What does environmental justice mean when you're writing a rule? What does environmental justice mean when you are writing a permit? What does environmental justice mean when you are looking at your grant programs? What does environmental justice mean when you are actually enforcing? And that's a really important one. Environmental justice, my office actually sits within the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, and that was done very thoughtfully back in the 1990s, because enforcement is where all of this stuff you see in the federal government, especially for overburdened and distressed communities, enforcement is where you really see the rubber meet the road on environmental justice. It's where you see the application of the regulation, of the permitting, and of the compliance at a community level. So the Office of Environmental Justice actually sits within the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. So we looked at all of these different things and developed Plan EJ 2014. And thus far as bureaucratic strategic plans go, it's been one hell of a success. We have issued interim guidance on rulemaking. We are now kind of in the second phase of looking at environmental justice and environmental justice analysis and permitting. We are laying out a strategic research roadmap for environmental justice and cumulative impacts, which is a huge cumulative risk, cumulative impacts is a huge brass ring for the public health community and for the environmental justice community. And we've also worked on different tools. We've worked on a legal tools compendium that goes through all of our different statutory authorities and actually delineates where does environmental justice live and how is it applied in the Clean Air Act, in the Clean Water Act, in RCRA. We've also, and something that I'm really excited about and that is taking up about 90% of my time right now, is we're just a few weeks away from launching a national environmental justice screening tool called EJ Screen. EJ Screen takes a wealth of demographic information from the United States Census, and it combines that with 12 different environmental indicators that are nationally consistent. So indicators looking at ozone, particulate matter, proximity to roadways, proximity to Superfund sites, proximity to hazardous waste facilities, potential exposure to lead, proximity to major water dischargers. And it actually looks at that down to the block group level, which is an extremely fine level of precision for such a national screening tool. And it compares them across those 12 environmental indices with the demographics, so you actually get an environmental justice index. It combines those environmental factors with low income and minority population factors and actually gives you an environmental justice index for those 12 different indices. So that's something we're very excited about, and we're hoping that folks across the board will be excited about it when we roll it out here in a few weeks. But that's all been really great. So we've been doing all this stuff for ourselves. And if y'all have ever been to an environmental justice meeting, standing up and saying, well, we've been doing all this stuff for ourselves isn't a very popular line. They want to know, well, what are you doing for us? Because we're the ones that live out there. We're the ones that are dealing with a Superfund site and a dirty waterway and a chemical plant and no healthcare facility and completely decrepit infrastructure around our neighborhoods. What are you doing for us? And that's been something that I've really been working on since I've come to the agency is, this is great. We've answered a lot of our questions, and we had to do that for us inside. We had to be able to go out and say, here's how you do EJ in permitting. This is how we're doing it. We figured it out. Now we want to show you. So that's really going to be one of the next big focuses of our next plan EJ, is to deepen how we're doing EJ inside of the Environmental Protection Agency, but look outside of the Environmental Protection Agency. Not just on the bounds of Executive Order 12898 and spreading it throughout the federal agencies, but really looking out to the states, looking out to the locals, looking out to counties, to port authorities. That is where environmental justice really starts to happen, because we acknowledge inside of the EPA that as big and mighty as we might think we are, when you get down to the community, we're about that much of the answer, and there's about this much left. When I worked in Houston, as many problems as Houston has, I would spend a single percentage point working on EPA issues in Houston. I mostly worked with the Port of Houston, I worked with the city, I worked with the county, I worked with our MPO, I worked with organizations such as y'all's, spent a lot of time working with the state. But EPA, not so much. I put my name on a lot of lawsuits, but other than that, and a couple of meetings a year, I didn't do a whole lot with the EPA. So that's really what we're looking at next, is taking what we've done with EJ inside of our own agency and moving it out. And that's important because now this is for I think really the first time where we're going to embrace both the fullness and the limitation of the executive order, which really gives us the mandate to do what we do and to start making that a real thing for communities out in the world. So we're really excited about it. We actually just laid this out for Administrator McCarthy yesterday afternoon, and she's very excited about it as well. Environmental justice was obviously one of the central planks of the administration under Lisa Jackson, and it has continued on under Administrator McCarthy. She's done kind of a sneaky thing, though. She's actually, which is good for us. I don't want to say sneaky bad. It was sneaky good. She stopped talking just about environmental justice, and she started talking about visible differences in communities. And when she talks about visible differences in communities, she's talking about environmental justice in a broader sense. And that's really another, besides what we're working on strategically with the next version of our Plan EJ, we're working a lot inside of the agency to really finally figure out, we have all of this ability to work inside of communities, to do good inside of communities, whether it's remediating a brownfield site or digging up an underground storage tank from an abandoned gas station, or working on area-wide planning, or teaching somebody about green infrastructure and how it's cheaper and keeps all this dirty water from running off into combined sewer overflows and into streams and rivers. We have so many different things we can do for a community, and they're so much more meaningful when you actually bring them together and do them together with a community. Not for a community, but with a community. And that's something that when I came to the agency a year and a half ago, I was actually really happy to find, is that idea that we were doing with, not for, it's not completely spread throughout the agency, but I thought I was going to have to come into the EPA and walk into every single meeting with a sword of environmental justice and lay waste to all of my new colleagues and just be this guy that everybody hates. Yeah, we hired a community activist and this is what we got. And I've actually found that that's not the case. I very rarely, extraordinarily rarely, so rarely that I feel like sometimes I'm not doing a very good job, have to bring up environmental justice inside of meetings because somebody else brings it up for me. The depth to which we have actually taken that inside of the agency, it's hard to express outside, and it's hard to express to environmental justice advocates just to what extent that has happened, but it has. And I think with a lot of the things that we look at in a lot of the agency's actions recently, and a lot of the things we're trying to line up to finish before the clock goes off on this administration, I think you really see the fact that we are focusing in on communities and what we can do for communities. So hopefully, over the next fiscal years, fiscal year 15, which starts this next week, and 16, we're really trying hard to get this agency in a place where we really use community as an organizing principle of our work. And I didn't really understand that when I first got to the agency, that phrase, community as an organizing principle. Because a lot of the times, of course, we're a regulatory agency. So there's folks focused on permitting. There's folks focused on rule writing. There's folks focused on criminal or civil enforcement. But the reason we do those things is because of a community. We're an environmental and public health agency. And we're doing that because those things, writing a rule, issuing a permit, enforcing against a violator, has an impact beneficially on the community that's being impacted. And that's, again, on my own personal history, that's something I didn't really get. And I have to admit, besides not realizing that I didn't need to wear a suit, I have to admit, I know absolutely nothing about Chesapeake Bay. I'm obviously not from up here. I've seen it a couple of times, and the places y'all were mentioning I've heard of, but I do know Galveston Bay. I'm from Fort Worth originally, just west of Dallas, and I spent about 6 years down in Houston. And I used to tell this joke all the time in Texas. I don't know if it'll make any sense to y'all. But in Fort Worth and Dallas are twin cities. And I think like almost any twin cities, they hate each other. Fort Worth is a cow town, Dallas is an oil town. So you're raised in Fort Worth hating Dallas, like literally in elementary school, hating Dallas. And we were taught that Houston was just a bigger version of Dallas. So when I got a job in Houston, I was like, and I had just come back from graduate school. I had these very expensive pieces of paper that said I was smart, and I had spent a lot of time researching and writing things that I thought were important, and I got this really great job in Houston. So I showed up in Houston, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great. There's all this air pollution going on. There's all these industry and interesting economic factors and interesting macro-social factors, and I'm going to be able to go there and do some research and really, write these wonderful things that people are going to think are really important. And when I got there, the Environmental Protection Agency was actually holding a hearing about refineries because they were issuing a new rule on refineries. And I knew a little bit about refining, not a whole lot. And they weren't going to hold a hearing anywhere in the United States about this refinery rule. They were just going to issue it, do public comment, close public comment, and we'd be done. And luckily, some folks around my organization said, well, they can't do that. This is a big deal. There's refineries all over this place. They gotta come out and listen to people. These folks that live next to refineries, they don't have time to sit down and write comments and submit them. You've got to come out and hear it. And luckily the EPA agreed. They said, you know what, we do. So we're going to come to Houston. And I'd been to hearings in Houston before, and they usually happen in the Galleria. And if you don't know what the Galleria in Houston is, it's exactly what it sounds like it is. It's this really fancy mall with a bunch of hotels way over on the other side of town. So when we got the EPA to agree to come to Houston for a hearing, we said, we'll set it up for you. Trust us. We're going to find a really great place. So we found this really great place. We found a little tiny community center that's basically just a basketball court with a roof and a bathroom in the back in Hartman Park in Manchester. Manchester is actually inside of the city of Houston, but it's right against the bank of what would be Buffalo Bayou. But Buffalo Bayou, by that point, is just called the Houston Ship Channel. It has a huge freeway at about an elevation of 100 some odd feet on one side, with a chemical plant and a hazardous waste-free processing facility right underneath it. It has a concrete and blacktop plant on the other side of it. It has a huge tank farm right here. It has a Valero refinery right here. It has a Houston refinery right here. It has an Exxon plant right here. It has a Goodyear plant that makes rubber since World War I right here. And it has the butadiene plant that gives the butadiene to the rubber plant right here. So it's completely surrounded. Plus it has a rail yard with about 20 tracks on one boundary. Then on the other boundary, you have to cross about 6 railroad tracks to get out. And until about 6 years ago, there was no bridge. You had to cross all of those rail tracks to get in or out, until a man unfortunately died one night because they couldn't get the ambulance out of the neighborhood because all of the rail lines were completely blocked up in the middle of the night. So they finally built a bridge to get out, which was great for about 2 months until they realized that all the truckers loved that bridge too. So it's completely subsumed by truckers all day long. Big tankers coming in and out of the community. So I thought, well, here's this place, here's this community surrounded by industry, surrounded by refineries. That's where we need the EPA to go. So that's where we got them. We got the basketball court with the roof on it, and that's where the hearing was going to happen. And I thought, this is great. Okay, my job is done. And they're like, no, Matt, we need people to show up. So I was like, okay, that should be easy, right? So we started actually canvassing the neighborhood. And then we went to the neighborhood next door, and we started canvassing that neighborhood. It took several weeks. It took a lot of flyers. It took trying to get things in newspapers, trying to get on TV. It took working with any and every organization that would listen to us. And I think we got about a dozen people to show up. Y'all are shaking your heads, you know. It's hard. And that's something that I tell my colleagues, that is one thing, that is one sword that I brandish quite a bit at the agency, is that no matter what we do, I don't care if it is the most intricate economic analysis of the impact of the Keystone XL pipeline. I don't care if it's looking at global carbon limits and the effect of black carbon on the North Pole. The hardest thing to do in the environmental space is that local community work. It is the hardest thing you can do. It takes the most time, it takes the most energy, it takes the thickest skin. But to me, well, I never wrote a single report in 6 years in Houston. I got done organizing for that one hearing and managed to get about 12 people to show up, and like 5 of them didn't even talk about the refinery rule. They talked about other stuff, which is fine. They have that right. No, it really is, because we need to hear it. I know now EPA still needs to hear it. It doesn't matter what the occasion is. If somebody shows up, you better damn well listen. But I never wrote a single report. I bought some. I paid other people to write some. But I wound up spending 80% of my time in those neighborhoods around East Houston, up and down the Ship Channel, visiting with folks like Hilton Kelly in Port Arthur, or Susie Canales in Corpus Christi, because that's where the work was to me. That's where actually finding what the problems are with that community that is experiencing that problem, living that problem, and working with them to try to work with others to find a solution to that problem and try to implement that solution to that problem. Again, it's the hardest thing we can do. But one of the things that the administrator yesterday was so clear on, because we were explaining everything we'd done before she became the administrator with all this stuff on rules and permits and everything else. She was like, that's great. That's great. And I'm not even try her Boston accent, but that's great. But the other stuff is where we make a difference. So we need to focus on that. We need to focus on getting it into the community, supporting their efforts, teaching the community, helping to guide them in how to work with us, and how to work with HUD, and how to work with DOT, and how to work with their local city council, and how to work with their state public health agency. Because that's when you really start in that community making a difference. And maybe 20 years from now, the rule that we're working on right now will have an incremental benefit to that community. But we can actually make things happen in that community now if we work with that community. So that's what my office does something really simple. And it does something really simple and incredibly impossible for the most part. But describing it is really simple. My office exists to take the agency out to the community, and when we can't do that, to bring the community back to the agency. And just like Jill said, one of the best ways we have to do that is what's happening next week at our EPA building over near Alexandria. It's our National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Because that is a way where we can actually bring the community to the agency. And they have the agenda, they have the forum, they tell us what we're doing right. Most of the time they tell us what we're doing wrong, but they really let us hear it. And that's why my office exists. And there's a lot of folks at the agency that don't get that. Some don't even agree with it. They don't think we should have an office inside of the agency advocating for something. But we exist, and our administrator is very much in support of the fact that we can do that inside of the agency. So I guess I just want to leave you, and I guess we'll have time for questions and answers. I think it is the hardest thing to do, and I think it's an incredibly important thing to do. And from my experience working in places like Galveston Bay, which I think is, in a lot of respects, has a lot of the same challenges as the Chesapeake, from what I understand. A diverse watershed, a lot of upstream agriculture, a lot of different communities, different shapes and sizes and colors of communities living up and down its banks and living up and down its feeders. Looking at where is the community, what is the role of the community, and really supporting the efforts of the community to help solve their problems and then to help solve your problems is where I think the work really happens and where I think the achievement really exists. So there is another forum coming up in December that really focuses on that at University of Maryland, looking around the Chesapeake at communities and the role of communities in and around the Chesapeake. So I'd encourage folks, if you're able to go to that as well. It's being organized mostly or in part by Jacoby Wilson, a professor at University of Maryland, who's been not just a good academic in this space, but has been actually working with communities to support their efforts. In Maryland, in South Carolina, in Charleston, he has been a wonderful supporter of engaging with and helping to lift up the work that's happening at the community level in some of those areas. And they've had some extraordinary successes. A lot of the stuff that's happening around the Port of Charleston has been a model in some respects of what we want to see happen between academia, large environmental groups, community-based organizations, and local, state, and federal agencies coming together to actually take something and not just mitigate for the negative, but actually to try to focus on maximizing the benefit that comes out of it, something like the expansion of a port. So I would really encourage folks, if you're available, Jill can get you the actual dates of it, but I'll be there for at least one of the days, as long as we don't get shut down. I think it's actually the 2 days after the continuing resolution runs out. So hopefully they get that figured out, because otherwise I'll be sitting at home. But thank you all, and I think we have time for questions. So if folks have questions about whatever.
Hi, I was curious to know what happened after that meeting in Houston, both in terms of that actual proposal for the oil refinery? And then also, how were you able to change anything or learn anything from that experience that allowed you to interact in a more engaged manner with the other communities?
Okay. So that it's actually funny. That proposal and that rule actually, in large part because of the comments and what was heard at the hearing, and then a little lawsuit that might have had my name on it, got pulled back. So if you've heard this summer that we're releasing a refinery rule, it's the same rule. It got pulled back, and the agency worked on it for a good 4 years, and we're just now putting it back out. And it is a vastly different rule. It's actually, I think, one of the best rules we've ever come out with. Within the first couple of years of this rule being implemented, you're going to see massive reductions in different pollutants from different parts of refineries. So it's out. I think the public comment period is still open. I think it's open until the first few days of October. And I've been in constant communication with a lot of the citizens groups that have been working on it. Actually, just yesterday, and some of them are going to be in town next week. So once that goes final, then it'll take another probably 9 or 12 months to finalize it. And there's parts of the rule that folks are still unhappy with. And I get it. And that's another one of the things that has really impressed upon me, because by the time I left Houston, I was really jaded towards commenting or even showing up at hearings. I'd show up at hearings because, we had to. You have to go to a hearing if it's around. But I was really jaded to, nobody reads these comments. All those decisions have been made. What are we doing? Why am I paying lawyers a lot of money to write 50 pages that nobody's ever going to read? I've really been impressed since I've been inside of the agency that we actually read comments, and we actually will change things because of comments. We really do. You might not always see it, and I think a lot of the time, because folks on the outside are looking at the most critical, sensitive part of the rule, and that's the hardest for us to change for all sorts of reasons sometimes. But we really do read comments, internalize them, and rules and guidance and policies change because of them. They actually do. It's pretty phenomenal the amount of attention we give, in a good way, to things like comments and public hearings and what we hear from the public when we're going through these processes. So I'd encourage folks always to do that. For me, what changed is I realized that I was very naive going into Houston, and I thought, well, we'll go out and we'll knock on some doors and we'll get on TV and we'll have a barbecue on the day and folks will show up, right? So what it changed for me was I realized that if we were going to do that, if my organization was going to do that community involvement piece, we had to be 100% in. And that takes time. It takes months and years just for the folks in a community who you desperately want to work with because you have similar goals. It takes months or years just to get them to trust you, to want to work together. And then it took me a long time to realize it's really unfair for anybody to show up to a community and say, well, here's this thing that we want to work on, and we realize that you don't have a grocery store or a dentist's office or a pharmacy or really bad bus service and all these other things, but we want you to work on this with us. If you want them to work with you on this, you need to work with them on those. You cannot go into a community and just say, hey, your creek is dirty, let's just work on your creek. The community doesn't see that just as their creek is dirty. They see this as part of everything that's happening in their community. And if you aren't willing to really be a partner to them, for them to be a partner to you, don't waste your time. You have to be all in with the community when you're going to work with them. And communities, especially a lot of the ones that are the most overburdened, the most vulnerable, they've been dealing with folks coming in wanting to do things for a long time. And a lot of them don't even want it anymore. If you're not coming in some way, some fundamental way to work with them, they are absolutely right to say thank you, but no thank you. You know, we need somebody who's really going to help us. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned this EJ database tool that you're developing.
Yes, sir.
Is there going to be an app for that? Is this going to be public available to the public?
So that's so I actually wrote a grant to use this program 3 years ago because I knew it was going to come out, and I thought it was going to come out 2.5 years ago. And it's been sitting there since I got there, and people have been working on it. It is going to be out. There's not an app for it. I don't think EPA, has EPA ever made an app? I don't think we've ever made an app. Have we? I don't know. It is going to be publicly available. It's going to be free. It's going to be web-based. There is a tremendous amount of data inside of it. There is a tremendous amount of pulling in, not just from EPA, but from other federal agencies, from the census, the ability to import data to it and overlay and interplay data inside of it. The entire tool and all of the data will be exportable. So, like say you want to do something around every major water discharger in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, you'll be able to export all of that data and crunch it on your own in your own GIS platform. So there's going to be a whole lot around it. It will be available in October, or no, actually probably early November. But this is another area where I really want to highlight the commitment of the agency to environmental justice. Part of environmental justice and part of what we hear all the time from environmental justice advocates is transparency. 10 years ago, this agency would have made this tool and it'd be where it is today, and we would spend another 5 years figuring out how we're going to use it, and then we'd let you see it. We're not doing that, and that still makes people kind of uncomfortable. We're going to release this tool in a few weeks, and we know that a lot of folks are going to ask, well, how are y'all using it? And we're going to say, well, we don't know yet. We're still figuring that out, but we're going to figure that out in front of you. Because this tool, I think, can have a lot of benefit for other users. So we want folks to use it. And we might go down a few rabbit holes inside of the agency and how we think we're going to use it. That's fine. I think once we put it out there that we're trying to be transparent and we're trying to work with folks on it, and we're really trying to not just show and figure out how we're going to use it in front of folks, but we really want to be a part of how other folks are going to use it. We want to work with states, and we're spending a lot of time right now talking to states. And one of the top line messages is, this thing's going to be out there. You do not have to use it because there is not a National Environmental Justice Act. So no state has to use this tool. We'd love it if you use it. And we want to be a part of you using it. We want to learn from you. We want y'all to learn from us. We want to be able to be a facilitator for other states, learning how you're using it. And that's part of why you don't have to register, you don't have to go through a security check, you don't have to pay for it. It's just going to be this big tool that we make available for everyone. So if you'd like to be updated about that, if you go to our epa.gov/environmentaljustice, you can sign up for news alerts and emails from us, and you can also sign up for our blog. We have, we're catching up to the overall blog in the agency. The agency has a lot of different communications devices. I'm very proud of the fact that our environmental justice communications is the second most popular and widely read and distributed communications of the entire agency, just behind the agencies overall. And in 2015, we're going to try to overtake the agencies overall. Because that's how we do it in OEJ. But yeah, those are great resources. We put out a lot of information through our blog, and we really try to challenge the agency through a lot of the stories. So it's not just a blog that's like, hey, EPA did this great thing, everybody love us. We ask some challenging questions in our blog. Primarily it's folks from the outside writing the blogs. It's folks in community organizations and environmental groups and states write the blogs, and they challenge us a lot. And it's hard sometimes to get that out of the agency when we have a blog by somebody saying, hey, President Obama, the Clean Power Plan didn't think about environmental justice that much. But we published that. And then I got yelled at, but we did it anyway. But yeah, sure.
So you alluded a couple times in your talk to the fact that As administrations change, both at the federal level and the state level, environmental justice focus kind of comes in and out of focus. And I know when I think of the states that I've worked in that sometimes they've had environmental justice offices and sometimes they don't, and they seem to come and go with different governors. And so in light of that, I just wondered how, well, I wanted to invite you to think about when you're looking across the Chesapeake Basin. I think a couple of the states do have environmental justice offices, a couple don't. What you see as kind of the most pressing environmental justice issues for the Chesapeake Basin. And I'm going to just preface it by saying I do think that Marcellus Shale development is one of them, and the rural communities that have had this historic, you know, extraction of resources, wood and then coal, and now Marcellus, and that they're still kind of carrying the environmental and health impact of that. But I'm also thinking that stormwater, and particularly in our maybe more marginalized communities, they're carrying the brunt of flooding and what property is owned being damaged. And so I'm just curious, when you think about the states sometimes being engaged and sometimes not being engaged, and then the issues that we have in the basin, what you think those issues are.
Let me start with the back part of that first. As far as what, I think you've touched on what I think are probably some of the biggest environmental justice issues for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And really, one of the things, again, to plug the thing that's going to happen in December, my office doesn't determine what are the big issues. We listen to the communities and they tell us what the big issues are. So if you're of the community and you tell me that Marcellus Shale is a big issue, that's a big issue. So then that's a big issue to us. But I happen to agree with you just personally. I think it's a big issue. I grew up in the Barnett, which wasn't the Barnett when I was growing up, although I still grew up with plenty of friends and family that were plugging holes in the ground trying to get oil to come out. But we've got, where I grew up, we've got about 5 wells within a 1.5 mile walk of my house. You know, my family still thinks it's great because they're getting royalty checks every month. But I actually know that some of the monitoring information from one of the wells, it's actually right behind the dock where I grew up fishing, had levels of formaldehyde coming out of it that have almost never been registered before. I mean, I saw that, and then I saw on the map where it was, and I thought, wow, I know exactly where that is. And that's been something, again, that has been something new inside of the agency just since I've been there, and it's something I've been working on, is that those sorts of bigger issues like fracking aren't typically seen as EJ issues all the time in the agency, which I couldn't disagree with more. The communities that are impacted, the communities that wind up supplying a lot of the workforce in different ways for that sort of industrial development, the boom and bust phenomenon that happens in and around communities, whether it's man camps or completely overcrowding schools and the limited health service capacity that those communities have, or access to food. I mean, all those things are such incredible impacts that will impact so much harder and so much more acutely the communities that are already overburdened and vulnerable. That I think that's a huge environmental justice issue. Of course, in the Chesapeake area, a lot of legacy pollution, a lot of old industrial pollution, whether it's Superfunds or brownfields or things we haven't found or hazardous waste facilities that we know exist, and their impact on the watershed is a huge issue for us. Runoff, whether it's agricultural or urban runoff, is a huge issue. That's one of the reasons why we're really excited, and one of the areas where my office is working to partner a lot more vigorously is with our Urban Waters Office, which does green infrastructure, which can have so many different benefits for a community, not just fiscally, but socially, public health impacts, sustainability. It has so many different co-benefits to it that we're huge supporters of green infrastructure. And everyone here knows what green infrastructure is, right? Y'all are water people. Okay. No, kind of. It's where you, instead of building flood retention ponds and streams to divert them into other streams, you actually build ways for water to soak into the ground or to be used in more beneficial ways. And there's all sorts of different ways you can do that in different parts of your actual city infrastructure. So we're huge supporters of green infrastructure. Now I've forgotten your first part of the question. Oh, the state. So the way, here's my philosophy at the agency. And again, this is something that I think a lot of folks get, but we're still working on to get everybody to get, is the EPA can't solve everything. We cannot top down, get to every issue, get to every community. You know, and we are in the communities that will have us right now. By getting there through EPA, federal government, the states, the locals, getting down to the community, we're in those communities in those parts of the country. But I look at places like the Texas Gulf Coast. I look at southern Louisiana. I look at western Tennessee. I look at Arkansas. I look at northern Idaho. I look at Arizona. Places where the EPA, we're not even going to touch the surface on the top down if we try to get to those places like that. The states, the locals, whatever's going on in those areas, a top-down approach is not going to work. But we still have to support the community. So that's one of the reasons why, by trying to align a lot more of what our agency is doing and really focusing on our direct forms of outreach and support. So just last week we announced another round of grantee, or 2 weeks ago, last week we released our newest grantees, and they're actually going to be in Washington at these meetings next week because we try to make everything happen together. And then this week we announced our newest round of grants that are coming out. And being able to more consistently and thoughtfully work with communities, because we don't have to come top down if we have ability to come from bottom up. And that's really one of the things that my office focuses on, because whether an administration at the federal level or at a local level changes, we can always come to the community directly. And if we actually do it thoughtfully and we commit to having not just that one-off engagement with the community around a grant, but we actually focus on building a relationship with that community and then helping that community get from that grant to the next grant, and then get from that grant into a brownfields redevelopment that brings in HUD and HHS to build a housing facility with some healthcare on a brownfield site, then we're actually doing something for that community. And while we're doing that, we're actually teaching folks at the local and state level, we're here to help. We're the government and we're here to help, but we actually mean it. We can actually do that, and we can teach the community at the same time that EPA, we can redevelop the brownfield site, we can clean it up. But you have to work with us, and you have to work with everybody else if you really want to make that change happen at the local level. And that's one of the things that, out of all the federal agencies, the EPA can do, is we can actually play that facilitation and educational role with the community. Here's how you can work with your local city. Here's how you can work with your county health district. Here's how you then can work with HHS. And even though we can't tell HHS what to do, we can set up all the dominoes to fall right at their front door.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. This was
Sure.
really interesting. I really enjoyed it. Going back to the EJ screen tool, so I'm asking your office and the forum organizers, can we follow up on this for next year and have a session where we can, hopefully you'll have the little kinks worked out by within a year?
All the kinks are worked out.
Okay. But you can do a session on
Sure.
teaching environmentalists with how they can use it.
We'd love to. And we will, once the tool is released publicly, we will be having public webinars that folks can log into and learn that as well. But absolutely, if y'all want next year to come back out, I'll bring the people that actually know what they're talking about, and they can do a demo and teach you about the tool. Because it's like every time I usually get to do the fun part where I actually talk to folks about it, but when it comes to demonstrating what's inside of the tool, I get to 2 layers and then I get lost, and they can get 10 layers below that. But yeah, we'd love to.
So please put that on your evaluation. And Jill, will you remind us of that next year? I think there was one more question up high side there, Nick, if you don't mind.
I can hear you.
Well, actually, because we're videoing this thing and we get it in.
Hi, I'm wondering if you have, if the agency has some stories about that kind of community, that gorgeous fantasy story that you just told us about, working with the agency to get, sort of a little bit of money here, and how the collaboration of community can come around, and how the sort of your agency can play a catalytic role in, the money sort of helps people come around a table and really fulfill a vision in community. Do you have stories yet to do that? And do you have, I don't know, vendors or other collaborating agencies or consultants who are helping you do that throughout the country?
Yeah, and we do. Actually, we just published another blog on the best one. We have one that's best. They're all great, but we have one that's best. Yeah. So Spartanburg, South Carolina. We gave one guy that was part of one little group in Spartanburg, South Carolina, $25,000 14 years ago. It was right around 2000, 2001. Because he had started looking around his community. His name's Harold Mitchell. He had started looking around his community, and it was a very economically depressed, high minority, of course, very low income, being economically depressed community. And growing up as a kid, his parents' cars, would only last 4 or 5 years, and they'd just rust away. They'd be eaten alive. And then his sister died of a really rare lung ailment. And then a couple years later, his dad died of the same thing. And this is the story he tells, so I'm hoping I'm getting it all right. So he started working with one of our environmental justice individuals named Cynthia Purifoy, who's out of our Atlanta office, because he knew that there used to be a chemical plant, some sort of chemical plant or a hazardous waste facility right in his community, but everyone was telling him that it was closed down and cleaned up and there was nothing to worry about. So he started talking to Cynthia Purifoy from our Atlanta office, and she was like, well, we can start asking better questions and more questions, and we have this thing called Environmental Justice Small Grants that can give you a little bit of support to ask those questions. So we did that. And long story short, I won't take you through all of the years of everything that he did, but they have turned that $25,000 into about $350 million. They've completely cleaned up, I think, 2 Superfund sites. They've redeveloped a lot of brownfield sites. HUD has invested in multiple facilities, both for seniors and for low-income folks. I think they have 3 health clinics now. Their schools have been revitalized. They're building a municipal golf course right now. They have a great partnership and agreement with the industry that's still located there. There's still one chemical plant located in the community, but they work together, they communicate together. The plant really is supporting what the community wants to see happen. They're working with, I think, the city and the state now to put in a solar farm over one of the Superfund sites that I think I'm not sure if it'll never be able to be cleaned up to residential use levels, or there's some limitation on one piece of land there, so they're going to put a solar farm on it. Just an incredible story. And it all started just with this little spark and a little bit of local interest. So we tell that story, and we actually have a DVD. I think you can actually access it. I don't know if it's through YouTube or through one of our other sites, but there's information about it on our website. That it's about a 40-minute DVD that really tells the story and tells how they leveraged, how they started working with the city, and how there was a lot of communication difficulties there. A lot of trust building had to happen, but we worked with them through that, and the folks at the community level were really committed to doing it. And then how they started working with HUD, and then how they started working with other federal agencies, how they started working with their state, and how they really took a very negative situation, and through the power of just collaboration and community level involvement have made it this huge success story for this community. So it's a really great story. And there are nobody's had that big of a leap, towards that level of community revitalization. But there are communities out there that are following that same path. In San Diego, in another area out on the Outer Banks or closer towards Charleston in South Carolina, folks in the New York area and Upper New York. There are those stories around. It takes, though, that sort of collaborative, all-in, our agency, other agencies, and really trying to come from the top down with whatever we have, but also coming from the bottom up, supporting the local community and helping to teach the local community how, if they really want to see holistic change in their neighborhood, they're going to have to work with everybody. They're going to have to be collaborative. There's nobody can solve anybody's problem all by themselves. None of y'all can. I'm telling you right now. There's no problem y'all are facing in the Chesapeake that y'all can fix all on your own. It's not going to happen. I don't care how smart or great you are. You're going to have to work with other people to do it. And we hope that we can help be a part of that.
We've got one final question.
Okay.
I have a question about how the executive order on EJ interacts with other possible permitting issues. For example, in the Chesapeake Bay, there's a lot of wetlands, and frequently you'll find a 404 type of permit. Those are issued generally by the Army Corps, and then some of that's designated to the states, but EPA has the ultimate responsibility in having delegated that authority. Sometimes these permits will be called a major federal action, and they bring in NEPA. Does this executive order on environmental justice or any other environmental justice aspect tools out there apply to these permits? Can they be used and brought into community comments when these permits are being considered?
That's a very good question. Yes, and when I talk about wanting to broaden EJ through these next years, now that I think we've answered a lot of those questions inside of our own agency, figuring out how that happens, and the executive order actually speaks to NEPA. And we've done a lot of work on NEPA over the last 2 or 3 years, and we're hoping over the next 6 months to be able to show some of the work we've been doing. It has been an enormous undertaking by one of my superstar staff members for the last 3 years. She's been working across the federal family, including from folks from the Corps, from Ag, from Fish and Wildlife, Interior. I mean, there are so many different ways to come at either a 404 or a NEPA. But they have been looking at different ways to take the best ways that folks can put EJ into such a permit or such a permitting process. It is a slow grind, working that thing through the system, working across the federal agencies to get the meat of it, and then working it all the way up through each of their individual silos, and then getting it through the top, and getting everybody to sign off on it, and then getting it to filter back down through each of their individual agencies. But yes, there is a way to discuss EJ in a 404 context or in a NEPA context. And I guess the best I can say is that's something we've been working on, and we're hoping to be in a place soon to start showing our work in a more fundamental way.
I just want to speak from my blue mind that we learned about last night and say, have you ever thought of giving Aaron Brockovich to be your poster child? I mean, all these stories of things that this Harold fellow, it's someone's personal story tied to health or an impact of health. I have a cousin who works in the Houston area in the oil industry, and he had to have a lung transplant. So, I mean, I think your encouragement for having us to take these stories with us and to work from the bottom up, I think has been wonderful for us to hear today. So.
Well, thanks. Something I tell everybody, and a lot of times, if y'all were an EJ crowd, you'd be saying, well, Matt Tejada, what are you going to do? And what I tell them is nobody's going to do anything because Matt Tejada tells them to. Nobody inside of that building in Washington is going to do, except for my staff, I hope. Nobody's going to do anything because I tell them go do EJ. It is the personal stories. It is the face of those problems. Not to put it blithely, but EJ sells itself. there's very few people who are writing a permit, if they actually go and look at the community that that permit is going to impact, that they're not going to go back and think, Jesus, what can I do more in that permit to help better protect those people? There's very few people that are going to do that. It's my job to show them that. That's really what I see the job of my office to do. And that goes down into lots of different ways of policy and all sorts of other stuff. But that's really, that's why people respond to it, because you actually see that our work can have a beneficial difference in the lives and communities of folks that need the most help but have traditionally received the least.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks.